My group of friends in high school are not what some would call the best and brightest. We tend to get ourselves into a lot of mischief. The four of us all grew up together in one of the more poverty-stricken neighborhoods of our city. There was Jake, always the schemer. It seemed like he'd spend all day every day just cooking up these ideas for us to do. Nate was the quietest of our little group. He was smaller than all of us and we gave him a ton of grief for it. However, what he lacked in demeanor, he made up for the willingness to try almost anything. Drew was almost the exact opposite of Nate. He was your typical jock stereotype. Hell, if you were to see him wearing his Letterman jacket, you'd swear he was a walking cliché. He was the largest of us, both in height and physicality. Teachers and students would often question why he debases himself by hanging out with delinquents like us. To which he always replies, "They're my friends." He's not lying when he says that. Since we were toddlers, we were all nigh inseparable. Sure, at times we do get him into trouble, but Drew is a super nice, likable guy, and a skilled athlete, so they usually just let him off with a warning. Last but not least, there's myself. I'm never any good at talking about myself, so I apologize if my descriptions are a little vague. My name is Matt, and I guess you could call me a jack of all trades. I had never been very good at one specific thing, but I like to think I'm pretty decent at a few. Like I mentioned before, we're pretty much delinquents. I'm not proud when I say this, but we've done a lot of stupid things. We've stolen from stores, broken into buildings, gotten into numerous fights with other kids. Now, I'm not trying to glorify these bad deeds or make it sound like we'd get into trouble every time we hung out. Those incidents all happened over the span of multiple years, and after getting caught shoplifting from a gas station once, we were all labeled as bad kids for life. That, however, all changed during our junior year summer vacation from school. Jake and I were sitting in his living room playing video games when we overheard his mother talking on the phone. She mentioned something about our old elementary school being shut down so they could merge the school into another one. When we heard this, the grin on Jake's face was chilling. Like I said, we had broken into places before, but nothing major. We'd never break into places with visible security systems in place, and we'd never break into residential houses. People often owned guns, and it was too great a risk to gamble our lives. However, abandoned places and open areas like construction yards were fair game. Anyways, Jake came to us one day and mentioned wanting to go to our old elementary school. I just smirked and shook my head, while Drew berated him for his stupid ideas. Nate, however, was ready and willing to go, as always. Even though Drew and I were both on the fence about going, Jake always seemed to have this way of talking us into doing his bidding. The dude was born with a silver tongue, I swear. So, against our better judgment, the following night we were all on our way to the school. Our old school was filled with fond memories. Most of them were us sitting in the principal's office, but they were still good. During our walk, we reminisced about the old times and how much fun we had. Before we knew it, we were already at the fence surrounding the school itself. A large sign with a construction company logo was fastened to the outside of the fence. We hopped the fence and crossed the vast field which contained 2 baseball diamonds as well as a playground area. After about 5 minutes of walking, we were all now standing near the back of the school. Drew and I both wondered how we'd get inside. We folded our arms and each gave sly glares to Jake, who stood confidently between us. He just returned a smirk of his own and told us to follow him. As we walked, he mentioned that one of our teachers from our youth always had the same room year after year, and she'd always leave one window unlocked because she enjoyed the breeze. I just laughed at how low the probability was that it'd be unlocked, but I quickly stifled my laugh as the window lifted open with ease. Jake hopped inside first, followed by Nate. Drew and I just sighed at each other and climbed in as well. Standing inside one of your old classrooms in the dark certainly is strange. Although the room had mostly been cleared out, we smiled to each other as we remembered all the time we had spent in this room. We ventured out of the classroom and into the hallway. The strangeness we felt from standing in our old classroom immediately shifted to an air of uneasiness as we entered the darkened corridor. Before any of us could comment on the creepy surroundings, Jake piped up and told us to split up. He said Nate and himself would go one way while Drew and I went the other. He said to meet us back here in a little while and told us to look for anything interesting. Drew, looking visibly unnerved at being here, didn't say anything. We split up and each made our way down the hall. How our school was set up was like a large yet simple square, with rooms on both sides. There was a second floor, but that was mostly for the higher grades as well as the faculty offices. In the center of this large square was the gymnasium. Drew and I wandered around, occasionally peeking our heads into random rooms. The entire place was cleared out for the most part. Some desks and debris had been left, but not much else. As Drew and I were leaving one of the rooms, I caught a bit of movement out of the corner of my eye. I looked over and down the hall adjacent to us. There appeared to be a young kid running away. You should have seen the look on Drew's face when I told him. It was hilarious, and yet strangely appropriate. We walked towards where I had seen the child, and I tried to joke with Drew to keep his mind off things. As we rounded the corner, however, nobody was there. Drew let out a massive sigh, but his breath instantly re-entered his body when we heard a shriek coming from down the hall. It sounded like Nate. Instantly, Drew and I sprinted down the hallway, our footfalls echoing off the linoleum below our feet. We almost slid into a wall of lockers trying to halt our momentum, but when we finally stopped, we glanced over and saw Nate shaking on the floor. We tracked his gaze and saw what had scared him. There was a little boy standing only a few feet from him. The boy couldn't have been more than 8 years old, but something was clearly off about this kid. His skin was paper white and had almost translucent hair. His eyes, however, were jet black, like two spheres of onyx placed into his skull. I slowly walked over to Nate and helped him stand up. His entire body shook involuntarily as I tried to steady him. I asked him where Jake was, and he said that he didn't know. Before I could question any further, Drew violently tapped me on the shoulder. I looked over and down the hall we just came from. There were 2 more children, a little girl and another little boy. They both were clearly different from the one in front of us, but strangely similar. The unifying feature they all possessed, however, were those empty black eyes. What was most jarring to me was how they were moving. They'd both take a step, then vanish from sight, only to reappear a few feet closer. I spoke firmly at Nate and asked him once again where Jake was. He said that when he entered one of the rooms, Jake was behind him, and when he came out, Jake was gone. He turned the corner and saw that boy, and then saw us. I called out down the hallway for Jake, but my voice seemed to echo only for a little bit before dying out. I told Nate and Drew that we needed to get out of here. They both just gave me a look of betrayal yet understanding. We ran past the singular boy Nate had encountered, and for the briefest of seconds I thought we were going to die. That surprisingly wasn't the case, however, as we sprinted past. As we ran, I continuously called out for Jake, but still no response. Eventually, we arrived outside the room we had entered. When we entered the room to leave the school, I saw something in the corner of the room. It was Jake, cowering in a ball. I walked over to him and demanded an explanation. He just trembled with a vacant look on his face. I pulled him to his feet, and one by one we all climbed out of the school. I was the last one out of the building, and as I pulled myself through the window, I glanced behind me. The entire classroom was now filled with children, their black eyes watching us all intently, like sharks in the water. It's been a little under a year since that night, and during that time we've all steadily drifted apart. I tried my best to keep us all friends, but Nate had gotten a girlfriend, which was surprising, and she took up most of his time now. Drew immediately threw himself into sports, focusing more on the team than on us. And finally, Jake, well, Jake just doesn't talk to anyone much anymore. It might sound strange, but I had repressed that night right up until graduation day. Then, as I watched Jake awkwardly walk along the stage and receive his diploma, for the faintest of seconds, I could have sworn his eyes were jet black. I glanced over at Nate and Drew sitting a few seats away. Nate was pale white, his hand gripping his girlfriend's tightly, and Drew had sweat dripping from his brow as he stared at the floor. To this day, I have no idea what those kids were. Either ghosts or demons or something else entirely. I just hope the demolition of that school was enough to make them disappear. But just in case it wasn't, and they are still out there, stay away from the children with black eyes before you end up just like my friend Jake. Or worse.